I'm Chad Brooks, and this is Stuff I Want to Say. Stuff I Want to Say. This is a weekly rundown podcast by me, Chad Brooks. You can find me at revchadbrooks.com. I've been doing the Productive Pastor podcast for over 4 years. I did the Threshing Floor for a long time as well, and I just create content across all of the internets. I'm a United Methodist pastor as well, and I think content creation is especially important for anyone who is leading other people. So this is the third week we've been doing this whole weekly rundown show, and I'll have to admit it's kind of different and difficult getting into this rhythm, not because I don't want to do this or I think it was a kind of a fly-by-night sort of thing, but every time we're creating content, we have to think about content. There's a very famous quote that for a long time I still buy into it a lot, and it's called this. It's the medium is the message. This is a phrase coined by Marshall McLuhan. And so much of it speaks into the way that we communicate is as important as what we are communicating. And back in the beginning of this show, during the little tester episode, or whatever you want to call this, I said I believe in podcasting and that I think podcasting is important. And then last week, I shared about how I feel like there's a demise of the internet. And I thought more about that this week, and it's not so much that something bad is happening to the internet, but I really do think that the internet has changed us as a people, and I think that many folks would not disagree with that. I often wonder if, in the early days of the internet, I'm thinking about how this might have been addicting to you. I remember I didn't have a computer all the way through high school. I graduated high school in 1998. I got an email address at a friend's house, and they had this weird computer internet thingy that all it was a box hooked up to the parents' TV. I don't remember, but anyway, they made me an email address that night, and I laughed so hard because I didn't even have said way to check this email address, and like 2 people had my email address, but I became obsessed with finding internet so that I could check my email. And it was months before I got something. And I remember being sneaky, and this is probably 1997, 1998, with the one computer in my entire high school that was hooked up to the internet. And we didn't even know how to use it. At that time, me and my friends were really into music, and so we would just add .com to the end of all of our favorite bands to see if they had a website. And about 1 out of every 5 times, I think, we found something, and there was a listservs, and I remember there was this feeling of excitement when you connected with someone, and I honestly, really and truly believe, and I think this is still the case, Facebook groups have somewhat kept this kind of early community side of internet together. But I remember having this feeling that there is a very small group of people across the world that are into the exact same things I am in, and we're interacting together. Isn't that crazy? And so I feel like the internet, for the first 10 years we had it, it was making us significantly better as people. It was connecting, it was idea sharing, it was the whole 9 yards. And I don't know if it was social media or smartphones, because in my mind, and I didn't do the research before I jumped on to record this episode, they kind of showed up on the scene at about the same time, because really and truly, Twitter was like that first major social network of when MySpace and places like that were kind of in their demise. And I don't even know if I would call Facebook a social network at first, because it functioned like MySpace or Zanga or these other interaction platforms. I think Twitter was really the first game changer. And Twitter did not work without access to a phone you could do the text to tweet thing early on, but Twitter did not work without smartphones and Twitter. So all this came together. So I've been thinking so much about the demise of the internet, and what I really think, people joked this week after the 5th episode of Game of Thrones this season. It only took BuzzFeed like 30 minutes to have 18 articles about it. I think that, and I'm sure there's places it has been, and I know the way that we're looking at media now, especially media's relationship to government and all the Russian hacking and fear and our issue with truthfulness now, all of that sorts of things. I'm absolutely sure that there are places where it has been, but to me, that old school kind of pure form of interneting, that there's a portion of it that still exists through podcasting. And so that maybe is why I still love this medium so much. And it's a medium that's becoming increasingly more and more acceptable. And it's also more and more accessible. I mean, we're getting to the point now to where finding a vehicle without an aux port, if not Bluetooth, is getting rarer and rarer. Now, yes, I know that there are plenty of vehicles that don't have it. I absolutely know that. And I also read an interesting article a couple of months ago, and I can't find it. I tried to find it, that talks about poverty and social classes because of the whole car thing of listening to podcasts. But I am now on my 4th vehicle in 10 years that has had access to some sort of auxiliary port or Bluetooth. So podcasts can be played through a mobile device inside of the vehicle. So it's there, it's here, it's an interesting phenomenon. And when I started this whole thing, I wanted to go back and try Anchor, which is this free podcasting service that I've kind of flirted with in the past, but I'm using more and more now. I really like it a lot. I believe that Anchor is a great entryway for people to jump into podcasting. I say all the time, don't bank on it being serious if you're really trying to like start a business or you're going to get into something that's going to be very, very important to your business or to your church or something like that. But it's a great way to get your feet wet. I mean, a fantastic way to get your feet wet. But with podcasting, I believe it in this format. If you feel called to help people, if you feel called to communicate to others, or if you just want to share things, I think Anchor's the way to go to try it out. I disregarded it. Because it kind of functioned just like a private social network. There was tons of fun interaction I was having with Anchor when a lot of their features that they were banking on heavy were interacting between podcasters, leaving voicemail messages for each other, and having the ability to publish those voicemail messages as pieces inside of your podcast. But Anchor was acquired earlier this year by Spotify, and that's really turning it into this formidable place. And so if you're thinking about podcasting, I would really encourage you to think about, hey, let me just try Anchor out for the summer and see how that works. See how, see if I am able to build up a listenership, if I can get into the rhythm that it takes to do this well. So I like that. We'll call that's my internet rant involved theory of the day. So jumping into the kind of second thing I want to talk about today. Earlier this week, I tweeted. That's the word. That's the word that we use. It was a few days ago. This is what I tweeted. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at RevChadBrooks, like everything else. And this is what I said. I'm slowly realizing the life that is ideal, healthy, and whole for anyone cannot be discovered without intentionality and being deliberate in your own personal awareness. In other words, you can't shoot from your hip and expect to be functional. Now, if you're listening, you may know this, you may not know this. If you want to hear the story, it'll actually be shared in a couple of weeks on this podcast through the sermon feed that I publish on it. But I had a pretty major health scare a couple of months ago. I almost died. I ended up going to the ER, thinking I needed a breathing treatment, and found out I was almost about to have a stroke. So I spent like a month at home. And then I've been back at work for a few weeks now, and I've learned so much that you have to be deliberate, because this week was funky. The last couple of weeks I kept things up, but to be completely honest, the beginning of this week, I fell back into old habits of just being way too busy, allowing stress to overcome my life, of not eating the way that I should be proactively eating to manage the long-term conditions that I have now. And I found stress there's no way, it was stress. I began to lose control again. And thankfully I caught it. And it's that point I realized this cannot be done without being deliberate and intentional about it. But life can't be done without. There's some people that might naturally can fall into more things, but discipline and that whole world is huge. And so it breaks my heart when I see discipline being such a roadblock to some people. Because discipline does not come easy. A really funny thing happened yesterday. I'm a huge fan of Gallup's Strength Finders 2.0. If you've not taken that or bought that book, I would highly encourage you to. But I'm finishing up a coaching cohort that I've been in the last year, and some of our last work together. In fact, I'm going to North Carolina next week for a full week to finish this up. So I'll actually be podcasting from North Carolina next week. I'll talk about that more later on in this episode. But we paid to have the full list of strengths, the whole 34. And I laughed so hard because my bottom 5 strengths, so the 5 things I am worst at in life, are both deliberateness and consistency. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot. And it's kind of where I jumped on the whole productive pastor bandwagon, but especially the last couple of months. And then especially this week when I realized if I'm not like proactive about these things I'm dealing with, this is what I'm capable of, and these are actually the worst things that I am in life. And honestly, I believe it because I looked at what it was and I looked at how the overcoming was, and it was just like, man, this is wow. Like this is this thing that some of us are not good at, and for some of us, it is a freaking uphill battle. But we can't have any sort of whole life. Now, if you're a Christian, that's going to be defined very differently. I'm a Methodist pastor, so I define that in a very, very distinct way. But if you don't believe in anything, if you just believe like a Taco Tuesday, and you're going to have to be deliberate. I really fully believe that this is built into us as humans, and that we are not naturally oriented towards being healthy and whole. We may think we are, and some of us, and even for the people that are like, my wife is one of these, I say often that I think Meredith came out of the womb with a spreadsheet in hand. There are folks that are like that, but I really believe that we have to be deeply intentional with ourselves and with those around us in order just to kind of hit this thing. So I've been thinking about that a lot now. I want something says about that. So to kind of move into this thing, I've not been reading that much this week because I've been just kind of getting into these rhythms. I fell out of my rhythms and whatnot. So, but back to North Carolina, and then back to kind of what another piece I want to add onto this show, because I realize that number one, I don't want to just come on here and kind of rant every Friday. That's not. Sometimes I have things I want to say, and sometimes I don't necessarily have something I want to say. I also realize that not that many of you would be terribly interested in just hearing me pine, or whatever the crap you want to call this, every single week, week in and week out. And so is my friend Michelle Manuel has her infamous Instagram stories. She calls them "and so." I love how she's made fun of her holding word there. I'm going to kind of move. There's some pieces of this show that I'm going to move on to a segment called Folks I Want to Talk With. And it's just people that I know, people I run into, people I have contact with that I just want to talk with. And we're going to have kind of specific conversations, and those are going to be shared here. And I want you to hear those things. I want you to be aware of this stuff. And so it's always things I'm interested in, but bringing other people onto the fold. So next week I'm going to be in North Carolina with several other pastors and religious leaders that are all terribly interesting. And so I'm going to try to get some audio from that so we can talk about what these sessions look like and what this thing is. I really want you to meet my friend Jack. He has a crazy life story. He's British, and he has that cool British accent, like that posh one is what they say, I guess. And there's other stuff. I want you to do that. Also, I got a friend named Juan Huertas, and then we are going to talk about Eugene Peterson and some other stuff if we got that coming up on deck. So, folks, I want to talk with. Well, anyway, if you like this show, if you've got something you'd like to hear about, just whatever, hit me up on the socials at Rev Chad Brooks. If you want to find the show notes for this episode, and I'm going to link to an article I talked about earlier from Fast Company about how Anchor is Spotify's best bet to beat Apple. I'm going to put that in the show notes. That's at revchadbrooks.com/stuff002. I'm out of here because I need to take a shower and then go get my car washed.